And now in part two of this webinar series on configuring these management of G Suite within Azure AD, we'll be focusing on configuring conditional access for G Suite. The topics that we'll be outlining here include an overview of conditional access, a sample conditional access policy for MFA, multi-factor authentication based on the location of the user, and then a review of a student's login experience once we have that conditional access policy in place. And just a high-level overview of the conditions, the parameters that we can configure within conditional access on these G Suite identities, much in the same way as we can create conditional access policy for any of our other identities in Azure. We'll be able to select whether we want the conditional access policy to apply to the user's location, the student's device state, whether it's compliant or not compliant, as defined within Intune. We can specify whether we want the conditional access to be triggered based on the application that the user is attempting to access, and of course the user risk policy as identified by Azure AD Identity Protection. And from there we can choose whether, based on those conditions being met, do we want the user to be allowed access? Do we want to challenge them with multi-factor authentication, or do we just want to outright block access to that student based on those conditions? And taking a look at our conditional access or sample conditional access policy for requiring MFA based on location, we first begin by selecting the cloud app. As we've designated G Suite within our enterprise applications for the single sign-on experience, G Suite is now made available to us, as with other applications, other single sign-on applications that we configure. And now we'll be selecting the location parameter. We want to go ahead and indicate that any user signing in from any location should be made to comply with this conditional access policy. And then we'll exclude all trusted locations. In this way, we can specify the subnets within our campus to allow for students to seamlessly sign in without being required to MFA, as long as they are within our campus's perimeters. And then whenever they're outside of our campus in areas that we feel would be less secure or perceived to be less secure, we can then require MFA. And that's exactly what we'll do in order to grant access to the students outside of our trusted locations. The student will in fact have to complete a multi-factor authentication challenge. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the sign-in experience now that we have that conditional access policy in place to require MFA based on the location of the authenticated user. So once more, the student will be selecting G Suite. The student will be redirected to Gmail to sign in with their respective email address. The student will then be redirected to Azure AD to once more enter that same email address. Then upon selecting next, the student will be prompted to enter their password. And once they've entered their password, they're immediately prompted with MFA. In this instance, we're using a mobile phone, or rather text to mobile phone to complete the challenge. But we can, of course, use other MFA tools to complete that challenge, such as hardware tokens, security tokens, and so on. And then once that challenge has been fulfilled, the user is once more granted access to their Gmail. And now we'll be taking a look at a high level of conditional access for, or rather reviewing a high level of conditional access. Based on user attributes, we can define that policy based on device state, based on the application to which the user is accessing, based on the location from which the user is originating, of course, again, based on the risk of that user. And here we have a little report on the user status from our Azure AD Identity Protection. And we can see that the user at the time of signing was originating from an anonymous IP address, which is an indicator that the user was likely trying to sign in with a VPN. And that concludes part 2 of our configuring conditional access for G Suite.